ahead and take their seats. We're going to get started.
Thank you for asking.
Thank you. All right, gentlemen, y'all ready? We'll go ahead and call the commission workshop of February 25th to order. We're going to start off with a moment of silent reflection, followed by an invocation by Jeff Smith, Clerk of the Circuit Court, and the Pledge of Allegiance by myself. Please rise and join me in a moment of silent reflection.
Dear Lord, we thank you for this opportunity, and we thank the Commission for having this discussion, Lord. We just thank you that we live in a county where we can discuss things civilly, without the hatred and the divisiveness. And Lord, we just ask a special blessing on those that are going to speak today. Give them the will and your confidence to speak. Lord, we also ask your special blessing on the Commission as they have to make decisions that benefit us, that affect us all. Lord, in addition, we ask a special blessing on our first responders and military men and women all over the world. Bring them back to us safely and protect them and place a hedge of safety around them. These things we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Gentlemen, are there any additions or deletions to the agenda?
Move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. The next, let's see. The next item on our agenda is going to be a general overview of the Children's Services Trust millage and issues. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dylan.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Good morning to the board. On January 14th, the Board of County Commissioners had voted to set a special workshop to discuss a proposed referendum concerning the establishment of a millage for children's services. Since that meeting, county staff has had 3 very lengthy and very productive meetings with several members of the community who have been advocating for this measure. Simply just want to thank, first off, the members of that group, Meredith, Lisa, Mike, Jeff, our clerk, and Hope, and just want to thank them for taking the time out to kind of discuss the issues and sit down and really have a good plan of going into this meeting. Based upon those meetings that we had and the direction from the Board of County Commissioners, staff wants to discuss today several of the key issues: millage rate, sunset, phase-in, committee membership, duties and responsibilities, and also the executive staff and staffing. So starting off with millage rate, under our current code, the board is supposed to impose up to 1/8 of a mil for children's services. So historical context of this, as set forth in the memo, in 2015, 2016, the board raised a little bit more than $850,000 for children's services. In a 4-year period, that increased to over $2 million, which is our current level for 2019, 2020, which reflects the 1/8 of a mil. The proposal that was presented to the board initially in January was for 1/2 of a mil. That would basically increase the amount of roughly $2 million to $10 million in 2025, 2026. So basically an $8 million increase in 6 years. Staff was not able to support such a stiff increase. There are several other options other than just simply the up to 1/8 of a mil now or the 1/2 of a mil as presented in the initial proposal. There's a mandatory 1/8, a sixth, a fourth, a third. So staff analyzed some of those different issues. Staff's recommendation was that the board go with a sixth of a mil. That would be a 33% increase over what the board is doing now. That would be roughly $3.4 million in 2025, 2026. Some of the reasons are there's a concern from staff of a lack of flexibility. During downturns in the economy, if you don't have this set forth millage, the board is able to fluctuate that number if there's not a minimum, which allows the board to respond to economic situations in our community and nationally. And thus, if you set a number too high, then you're stuck with that number, which you have to deal with during those times. Additionally, it's important for the board to realize that there are other items pending out there for referendum. I know that the school board has been talking about extending their $500,000, and also Florida Forever has approached the board recently in consideration of a referendum for their items. So that was basically the millage proposal out there. The second item was an item of sunset. I know the initial discussion at the board meeting in January, the board had talked about maybe a 15-year sunset. We had a very good conversation with the representatives proposing the referendum. We thought maybe it might be better to have it on a 4-year cycle such that you've got the going back to the folks at a presidential election, like in 2020, would be the best way to handle it. Options there for the board are 8 years, 12 years, 16 years, 20 years. We had a good conversation with the folks who were seeking the referendum. I think we all came to a good agreement. We thought 12 years might be a good time frame for having the item come back before the voters. We also discussed, as was in the original proposal, the concept of a phasing in. I can tell you that a phasing in approach certainly is going to depend on whatever the millage rate is that is ultimately voted on by the voters. So I know it was in the original proposal. Staff had originally recommended a sixth of a mil and would be looking for a 3-step increase over a 5-year period to get from the current $2 million number up to the $3.4 million number in the 2025-2026 timeframe. But there are certainly other ways to divide up how that phase-in goes, and as I stated earlier, that'll certainly depend on the type of number that's chosen for the ultimate millage. Another issue that we talked about was the committee membership. I can tell you currently there are 13 members of the Children's Services Advisory Committee. They are made up of a county commissioner. There are 5 other ex officio members, and then there are 5 members who are appointed individually by each board member, and then there are 2 at-large members. So that's a total of 13 members. The proposal that was presented had 7 ex officio members, 4 of which were the same: superintendent, Department of Health, a judge, member of DCF, and there was a 5th one I wasn't sure if was an ex officio member or one appointed by the board. It is what is now the law enforcement officer, but what was proposed as the name as a criminal justice representative. So those were some similar positions in the proposed board versus what was on the board currently. I had a really good discussion with the representatives, and I think we came to some good agreement here. I think the concern expressed by the representatives were that they just didn't want 5 people appointed by the board who didn't really have any knowledge, weren't involved in children's services issues. So I think we kind of merged some of the ideas in the current proposal with what's currently in our code and came up with an idea that the 5 board members of the Children's Services Advisory Committee who were appointed by the board would be folks who would have expertise in children's services issues. So they may be a pediatrician, they may be a mental health individual, maybe an educator, maybe someone who deals in children's services items or advocacy. So those would be the types of folks that the board members would individually appoint. And so I thought that was a really good recommendation from the advocates, and I think this was an issue that staff could agree with. And then we still propose generally the other makeup of the board as it currently stands. However, staff thought it might be a good idea, in addition to having what is already on the board, which is the superintendent, a representative from the hospital district, because the hospital district also is involved in health issues. So One possible proposal for the board to consider would be have a commissioner on the 6 board-appointed ones, which would be the 5 members plus an at-large, and then the 6 officio, and the 6th ex officio member may be the hospital district representative. So there's just some different ideas for the board to consider, but certainly staff wanted to make sure that the board members still were appointing a majority of the members are involved, but also having the hospital district involved. Another issue that we discussed was staffing and the executive director position. So right now we have a executive director. It is a person hired by the county administrator. Most of that person's role is dominantly an administrative role. They're keeping track of the invoices that are coming in from the groups that are getting funded by the Children's Services millage. They are keeping track of not only those invoices, but they're obviously bringing to the Children's Services Advisory Committee the applications and helping the committee work through the application process for the funding. It was not initially clear in the original proposal that was presented on January 14th how the executive director position would be chosen or hired. We had very good discussion with the group about that issue. I think we all landed on this would be somebody who would be hired by the county administrator. So this was something more, again, we were in agreement with. I think we also agreed about sort of the role in terms of issues with regards to the executive director. Clearly, if there's going to be an increase in funds for children's services, we definitely need more staffing and more time for that person to be able to do more monitoring and more oversight as you increase the types of funding that are going to various organizations. I will say there is a key issue for the board to talk about today or consider is I know the folks who were proposing the referendum were looking more for an advocacy role in addition to just the administrative role for that executive director position. I know staff is looking for that to be more administrative in nature versus advocacy, which is just a standard sort of governmental type role where we don't typically have directors of our positions going out there trying to seek out folks to take on projects for the county. That's what we have a procurement manager for. We put it out on the street. It's bid equally and for everybody to seek, and there's no sort of appearance of favoritism for any group. But I can tell you that is an issue for the board to discuss today or consider today is sort of what role do you envision from an executive director. And then finally, use of funds. I know in our current ordinance code, it's not exactly clear. There's not an itemized list of specific uses for the funds. I know the proposal that was presented to the board on January 14th did contain 14 different sort of categories of items. Staff had reviewed the list. I can tell you we were uncomfortable, and I think the group who was advocating for it agreed. Probably don't want that to be used for purchase of real estate or other property. This really should be going to programs. And additionally, there should be some use of that for administrative costs for the county, but not necessarily administrative costs for the agencies who are seeking the funding from the Indian River County. So we also thought about what are the uses with regards to jurisdictional issues. You've got a situation where you have Children's Service Advisory Committee from the county, but then you also have the hospital district doing programs, and you also have issues that are under the expertise of the school board who are obviously working on children's services issues. So one of the key issues that staff talked about was we thought it would be important to really try to do a good job of dividing what are the right swimming lanes for the different funding agencies. And so that was an issue we had raised and presented in our memo. And certainly one of the issues that I was concerned about was different expertise. The school board may have some expertise in a children's services issue. The hospital district may have an expertise and didn't want to have a children's services advisory board executive director who may be in conflict with those other themes or theories or whatever the folks in the other jurisdictions were doing. So that was one of the keys with sort of having different swimming lanes of expertise. And so with that, I just want to again thank the whole group who met with us on several occasions, did a lot of hard work. They've got their work in the backup that was presented, and so I wanted to make sure I reached out to them. I also wanted to thank Jason and Kristen and Michael of our county team who also spent a lot of hours putting this together and also meeting with the folks. I think that addresses some of the key issues that I had in my memo, and for the discussion, I know Jason may want to have some additional comments, but I'm available for questions.
Thank you. Jason?
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Pardon me. So Dylan covered a lot of the issues, the specific issues. I want to just cover some large, big picture items and address funding a little bit more. So first off, I know Dylan already did, but I want to thank the members of the Exploratory Committee, Michael, Jeff, Meredith, Lisa, and Hope in particular. We had several productive meetings. I think we had some good discussions, and we arrived at a lot of common ground. We agree on a lot of things here. There are a couple items where we have a different viewpoint, but I'll say it's clear from our discussions that the group has put in a lot of research and a lot of effort into this. And we can see that they're focused on improving outcomes for the children in Indian River County, which we all agree is a laudable goal and worthwhile effort. So I want to state that while we still have some differing opinions on a couple of the issues, that these concerns don't discount the overall goal and the work that they've put into the process. So with that, I do want to talk about a couple of big picture things and for the board to consider. So one thing, I think it's important to consider the big picture when making a decision on something like this ballot measure. The commission is aware of the other two items that Dylan talked about that are initiatives for 2020, the school district's $500,000 and the potential environmental land bonds. So we know that we need to consider these in the whole. However, I think it's also to realize that all of these taxation and expenditure decisions are cumulative. So we're frequently faced with issues one by one in a meeting such as this or another meeting, and individually something can have merit and we move forward with that. But later the county's faced with other important initiatives, and I think that it's good to consider these overall and holistically from the total impact on the expenditure of county funds. I'll give an example. For instance, our largest agency that we fund is the Sheriff's Office. So going forward, you know, we've had issues where there's been a disagreement on the amount of funding for, say, the Sheriff's Office. I want to make sure that we're not putting ourselves in a situation where other funders are saying, well, you increased funding for this, and I'm asking for something important. So I just want everyone to keep that in mind, and the overall larger impact. Now, Dylan touched on this whole lane question, but I want to dive into that a little bit deeper. So last year, the hospital district invited me over to one of their meetings to discuss, among other things, places where we may have an overlap in programs that we're funding. So I want to thank them for that. I want to thank Anne Marie. I see Mary Beth's here also for being here. And an example of this was reported on TC Pond last week, where the hospital district's increasing funding for doula services. Well, we also fund doula services from Children's Services. And I don't want to speak to their policy or direct their policy, but my understanding is they may be increasing funding for community health type initiatives following the acquisition of the hospital by Cleveland Clinic. So I think that's something to keep in mind going forward, that the district may be focusing more on such programs. I'll also note that analysis by one of the exploratory committee members indicated that over $500,000 or over 25% of the current year's allocation went to programs that might be considered the domain of the hospital district. To the expertise issue, when it comes to community health, they are experts specializing in these matters, whereas the county is more of a generalist. As the board knows, we have over 50 boxes on our org chart, things like running a fire department and operating parks and conservation lands and libraries and maintaining roads and building roads, and also we do children's services, among another 50 items. So we run the risk of being a jack of all trades and a master at none. So the second area in the lanes concept is the school district. And I see Dr. Moore's here, so thank you for being here as well. But I want to expand on that. So you've heard me maybe complain about this in the past, but I just want to add a little bit more detail. So our children's services programs, we fund 4 priority areas right now. One of those is after school, summer activities, academic enrichment. So over $400,000, or nearly 25% of the total current year allocations, were for programs in this that support this priority. So this includes programs where we fund, for instance, a nonprofit that reimburses the school district that is paying school teachers in their regular paycheck from the school district for providing after-school programs that are supported by this outside agency. To me, that speaks to something that should be a school district funded program, in my opinion. So staff is also concerned that if we increase the funding from here, this will lead to more expenditures on programs that, while worthwhile programs, I believe should be the domain of the school district. And again, part of the concern lies in expertise. The school district's main function is to provide K through 12 education, and they're specialists with expertise in this matter. Again, we are generalists that do 50-plus items in addition to these things. So, in summary, on the lanes concept, we've got almost 50% of our current funding is allocated to programs that may be the province of another local government entity. So, while it may not make sense to prohibit funding for health-related programs or educational programs, I think at a minimum we should collaborate and coordinate funding. Furthermore, if another local government entity is potentially increasing funding or is better equipped to manage these programs, that it might mean if they can fund more of those programs, that could free up some of the existing dollars, meaning that the millage increase, the need for a millage increase wouldn't be as significant. Now, there's one program that I simply don't understand the need for a large amount of county funding. So I apologize if I go on a little bit of a rant here. One of the needs that is identified is preschool, which I have no issue with overall, but pre-K. In 2002, the voters of Florida passed a constitutional amendment, an amendment to the state constitution, and I'm going to read that. The amendment states, and I quote, "Every 4-year-old child in Florida shall be provided by the state a high-quality pre-kindergarten learning opportunity in the form of an early childhood development and education program, which shall be voluntary, high-quality, free, and delivered according to professionally accepted standards." That's in the state of Florida Constitution, passed by a statewide ballot referendum. So I want to reiterate a couple of phrases. Every 4-year-old provided by the state, high quality. So a concern that I have is if we have a need to spend significant county dollars on pre-K programs, or that there's an unmet need, a substantial unmet need there that is reflected in the backup as part of the preschool need, my position is this is a matter for the state to address. If we believe they're not adequately doing so, perhaps we need to ask them to do that. I don't believe that just because the state might be failing to provide a service that is outlined in the state constitution, that is our place to step in and make up the funding gap. So have fairly strong feelings about that particular item. In summary, at the end, I'd just like to say a final point is that a substantial increase in funding can potentially lead to less effective expenditure of taxpayer dollars if we have a significant increase. I will reiterate that our current year funding of $2.1 million compares to the total asks for $2.5 million. So if you look at that, we funded well over 80% of the requests. So we concerned about increasing the dollar amount too much and driving requests more so than meeting a need. And this is just a dynamic that I think we need to remain vigilant on in any government program. So with that, I'll say I will stop talking and thank everyone for being here and participating in this process, and turn it back over to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, if you don't have any questions for staff at this time, I was going to turn it over to the group that's been working with staff to answer some of those questions, and then we can have questions from there if that works for everybody. Okay. Lisa, Meredith?
Good morning.
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 My name is Lisa Kale. My address is 6755 4th Street in Vero Beach. For the last 18 months or so, I have been facilitating the efforts of a group of community leaders who formed an exploratory committee to consider potential solutions to an identified need for adequate and sustainable funding for children's programs in Indian River County. In my comments, I'm doing my best to reflect the consensus of this exploratory committee. Since we were before you on January 14th, as you've heard, we have welcomed the opportunity to have several meaningful exchanges with county staff. We have endeavored to be helpful and transparent and have done our best to incorporate the feedback we have received along the way. The goal behind every conversation around this issue has been to create an optimal model for adequate and sustainable funding that can support a quality continuum of care for our children. With this goal in mind, we want to provide a brief response to the staff report. We believe that there is a great deal that we fundamentally agree upon and the potential to reach consensus in some of the areas where we currently differ. We appreciate staff's perspective as to the value of a phase-in and a reauthorization. With additional discussion and analysis, we are confident we can reach agreement as to the optimal timeline to reach the millage cap. Having a framework within which outcomes can be measured and analyzed is valuable, and to that end, a 12-year reauthorization would seem to be an appropriate timetable. In fact, these 2 points in particular, phase-in and reauthorization, should give us additional confidence as a community that a truly adequate millage rate is a responsible and appropriate solution to the challenge before us. The community has an opportunity to prepare and implement, and then a chance to evaluate and reaffirm if the value has been proven. Our citizens can and should be trusted with this decision. Similarly, we are confident that we can reach agreement about the membership of the advisory board. The proposed draft was a combination of what currently exists and best practices in other counties. There is room for negotiation and agreement. We believe that the advisory board must balance an objective perspective, county oversight, and appropriate expertise, and there are many ways to get there. While staffing is an important distinction between what currently exists and the proposed Children's Trust, there is absolute agreement that administrative overhead must be limited. We agree that an 8% cap is appropriate. In fact, combined with an adequate millage rate, we believe that far more than 92% of Children's Trust dollars can be expected to go to programs. At the same time, qualified professional leadership is critical to the success of a Children's Trust that will prioritize long-term planning, accountability, and measurable outcomes. Management of funding focused on the success of our children and the future of our community deserves appropriate leadership, and that requires investment. We agree that there is a need to better align and coordinate with other funding entities so that duplication can be avoided and community effectiveness can be maximized. Appropriate staffing and oversight will allow the Children's Trust to play a meaningful role in this effort. Notwithstanding the preceding areas of general agreement, in the end, a Children's Trust is meaningless if the funding isn't adequate as well as sustainable. As you will hear shortly, the community has brought this initiative before you not because it feels good to help kids, but because the future viability of Indian River County requires an investment in our children so that they can reach their potential as our future neighbors, homeowners, workforce, and taxpayers. The staff's proposal to keep the same millage rate doesn't move the needle. The staff's proposal of increasing to a rate that would have provided full funding for all CSAC agency requests is similarly inadequate. The ask of agencies to individual funders generally reflects a measured, realistic hope that the programs will continue to be funded and possibly increased incrementally. It doesn't reflect the vision or aspiration of a particular organization or the gaping needs that exist within our community. While we firmly believe that the 2/5 of a mill proposed in the draft referendum would be an optimal level of investment in our community's future, the staff report references a potential phase-in to a cap of 1/3 of a mill and provides the possibility for common ground and consensus. The need for adequate and sustainable funding is at the core of this initiative. Models that we can learn from and build on have been identified and studied. The Children's Trust is an Indian River County-specific, community-centered model. It is grounded in the principles of local control, sound investment, efficiency, accountability, quality, measurable outcomes, and collaboration. We fully understand the potential quantifiable benefits an adequately funded Children's Trust would provide to our children and our community over time. Shame on us if we fail to fulfill this potential. In the end, we are asking you to give the citizens of Indian River County a chance to decide whether they support a children's trust. We are asking you to give your constituents a voice in the future of our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Kent.
Good morning, Chairman Adams, Commissioners, staff. I'm Michael Kent. I reside at 6255 59th Court here in Vero Beach. In the next few minutes, I'll give more specific focus to the key points that were addressed by the staff report and by Lisa. My hope is, fundamentally, to show that there is much common ground between the Children's Trust proposal and the county's existing process of funding children's services and programs through the Children's Services Advisory Committee, or CSAC, as I'll most often refer to it. There is much, I believe, that we already agree on or can reach agreement on. CSAC is a funding model that has a lot going for it, and our hope is that we can build on what exists to make it more robust and impactful to the children and to everyone in the county. As Lisa said, the Exploratory Committee began our work more than 18 months ago, and our objective was to explore the need for and the efficacy of an effort to bring adequate and sustainable funding to children's programs and services in Indian River County. You'll hear from several other members of the Exploratory Committee today. I just wanted to say, I think as Lisa did, when you hear me say we, please know that I'm presenting on behalf of the entire Exploratory Committee. The Exploratory Committee did not presume to draft a mission or a vision statement for the Children's Trust, believing that that's something that should be completed by the advisory board, its staff, the county commissioners. However, we did compose a purpose and an objective statement. Let's take a look at them. The purpose of the trust is to promote healthy children in a healthy community. The term healthy encompasses socioeconomic, physical, environmental, educational, and behavioral health. The objective of the Children's Trust is to improve the quality of life for all children in Indian River County by providing a coordinated system of planning and delivery within which children and families' needs can be identified, evaluated, and addressed. I'll ask if those sound familiar to anyone, because they should, as they are essentially taken directly from the existing county ordinance establishing and guiding the work of the Children's Services Advisory Committee for the last 30 years. Perhaps I should have held these next two slides to the end, because I believe the discussion over the actual millage is going to take up most of today, but I did, however, want to share the revised options that we presented to the county at our recent meetings. The feedback that we received clearly after the January 14th BCC meeting made it clear to us all that half mil was not going to fly. So we modified our request with the two options that are in these slides. Presenting in these slides is proposed millage options 1 and 2, what those millages are, when they phase in, and also a commitment, and you've heard it both from Dylan and from Lisa, our commitment to a reauthorization. In this slide, our option 1, you'll see on the left, it again, just as Dylan said, the language that defines the up to 1/8 of a mill. It's a dependent millage. It comes out of the general fund. On the right in our proposal, the first proposal, was to have a 1/4 of a mill for the first 3 years, move to 1/3 of a mill for 3 years, and the last 6 years would be at the 2/5 mill or 0.4. Again, this would all be a dedicated millage that the voters would have approved, and those dollars would be dedicated to the operations and the funding of the programs through the Children's Trust. Again, at the bottom, you see our authorization that would be required in 12 years. The next slide is fundamentally the same. Option 2, in that we asked for 1/4 of a mill for the first 3 years, 1/3 of a mill for 6 years, and it would only be in the last 3 years, 10, 11, and 12, that 0.4 would be available through the dedicated dollars. Next slide, please. To help everyone have a better sense of what the actual cost to the Indian River County taxpayers is, this slide shows the cost to the average homeowner. You'll note the average single-family home in Indian River County in 2018 was $246,791. That was according to the Florida Housing Data Clearinghouse. Assuming a standard $50,000 homestead exemption, the taxable value for the average individual, would be $196,791. On the left, you'll see that the cost for a current taxpayer, and again, this is out of the general fund, but at 1/8 mil, it's about $24.60. For the Children's Trust, you see what the millage cost would be to the average taxpayer at 1/4 mil at $49.20, a third at $64.94, and at 0.4 at $78. I also want to point out, using the third as the example, with $24.6 already being spent and an increase to 1/3 mil at 64, that's actually only an increase of about $40 for the homeowner based on our proposal. The next series of slides drill down on what currently exists, components of CSAC, and what's being proposed in the establishment of the trust. The first couple of slides have to do with the advisory committee. You'll see on the left, just as Mr. Reingold explained, that's the makeup of the current Children's Services Advisory Committee. I think it's been that way since 1999. On the right, and actually we'll get to a specific slide, but this is just confirming. As we discussed in our meetings, we absolutely agreed to provide 7 advisory board slots to the Board of County Commissioners, including a county commissioner. But we'd like to follow the process that Dylan spoke to. Hopefully the appointees will have some background or expertise in the arena of children's services. Again, the intent is to try to build the highest quality advisory board that we can to provide assistance to staff and build a diverse set of backgrounds and skills. The next slide, and this is an example, but I think it encompasses exactly what Dylan was talking about. On the left, the number of positions. See, the first 7 go to the Board of County Commissioners with a commissioner. Each commissioner gets a choice. And this is what he was talking about. There are other qualities and types of individuals that we might like to have represented, and the hope is that the people that would get appointed by the commissioners would maybe fill one of these slots, as long as an at-large child advocate. We're not written in stone with what the other sort of ex officio mandated slots are. What I think I want you to hear is that we absolutely are willing to work with you. I know that we can find common ground here. And actually, I would say special thanks to your county attorney. He's really the one who kind of in our meeting said, I think there's a way to make this work. We want control in a certain majority, and I think one of the ways we can get there is by asking that the people that get appointed have the backgrounds and skill sets that will help you. The next slide focuses on key duties of the 2 advisory groups. I know it's very wordy, it's hard to read, but I can assure you that fundamentally they are very, very similar. As this ordinance gets rewritten, if there are operational or process issues regarding duties, I am, again, confident. This is not an area that we're going to get hung up on. I think that we're very committed to the duties that do exist already here. And the key things on both sides would include the completion of a needs assessment, their ability to collect data, recommend funding, recommend staff, complete an annual report, work with other community funders, and to prevent a duplication of services. What can be funded by the Children's Trust? As Dylan said, you might be surprised, and on the left, there are a couple of phrases that I found in the ordinance, but they don't specify. It sort of lacks specificity in terms of what could currently be funded. And maybe we erred too far in the other direction in our initial draft, but there were an abundance of descriptors that helped define the kind of programs, and that was sort of based on ones that are already being funded. And of course, sort of when you have a job and all other duties as assigned, at the bottom there's a provide any other services that the county would determine should be funded. It allows for that modification as needs and gaps in services are identified moving forward. The next area has to do with subcommittees, and this is hard to compare because the fact is the 3 committees listed under CSAC do exist. They're the 3 that are the standing committees. I've served on the Needs Assessment Subcommittee probably for almost a decade, and now Meredith from United Way is serving on that. There are folks on our Exploratory Committee that are on that, as well as the Grant Review and a nominating subcommittee. We did not build in specific subcommittees. Again, because as process gets defined, we thought that that could be part of the discussion that determines what's best to, if we want to tweak the system in any ways. But I can tell you, we have no problems with the existing, and in fact, it's likely going to be very, very similar to the existing CSAC structure. Again, I can't believe that this is going to be an area that there's going to be much conflict. I think there'll be a lot of commonality. Next, staffing. I know a little of this is redundant. On the left, current staffing for CSAC is a 0.6 FTE. As was shared, this is a shared staff position. It's mostly administrative. It is a county staff position, and I should say the cost for that staff person is above and beyond the eighth of a mil that the county spends on children's services. On the right, our recommendations are, as you've heard, we want a full-time director, likely an advanced degree, a professional with experience and expertise in children's services sector. I've noted in italics, the advisory committee could make recommendations and assist with the director search and selection, but we absolutely understand these are Indian River County staff positions, and the county makes the hire. I would also note, 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, we actually provided the county with a proposed job description for the director. And again, even the title, whatever falls within the framework of county for the leader of this particular area division, department, whatever we call it. We know these are staff positions. The difference here is, though, of course, all staff positions and any other overhead that is incurred by the Children's Trust will come from that dedicated millage. And it's probably a good point to just reconfirm we have absolutely no issue with the fact that that is capped at 8%. The RFP process. This is the processing of funding applications, reporting both from agencies and to agencies, reviewing, program monitoring. They can be almost identical. Again, this language was not in anything that we proposed. This simply shares that the process fundamentally now works in partnership with United Way. We have an online program called EC Impact. It's actually used by 5, maybe even 6 different funders in the community. It's a real advantage to the providers in that there's a commonality across the board, and there's some cutting and pasting that they can do. We don't have a problem, obviously, with maintaining this, and as a matter of process, we would probably suggest that we continue in the same way. That's self-serving when United Way stands here and says that, but it's a nominal cost to the county, and you get a lot of staffing support from us to deal with all of the agencies as well. The one area that we do generally believe that can be enhanced a bit is the review process in the grant applications and the monitoring of agencies. And fundamentally, we do think that the limitations are because of the current staffing. Last slide for me. In a nutshell, this shows where we believe the Children's Trust can take the existing CSAC structure and build on it to bring enhancements to the process and greater impacts to the children in our community. I've said it twice, and I don't mean to denigrate at all. The reality is, with a 0.6 staff person, as has been said, spend most of their time shuffling the papers, managing minutes, dealing with meeting schedules, and then processing the applications, the reviews, et cetera. And the staffing, we believe, limits the ability to really give as much oversight as ought to be given to agencies and programs, to bring greater accountability, long-term strategic planning, et cetera. In the Children's Trust model, the increased staffing level, hopefully the higher quality of the advisory board, but that sounds like a slam to the current children's services, and I don't mean that at all. We'll provide capabilities to enhance some of those things that are listed there. And there's just generally, we believe in what started this process, a shared efficiency by being hosted by the county's infrastructure. We are grateful for the work and the impact that the county has made with CSAC over the past 3 decades, but we believe that there is an amazing opportunity being presented to the county and hopefully to the community to make a truly significant investment in the children. Again, we're confident that this can work. We can't afford not to take on this challenge, and we hope that you'll give the citizens the opportunity to decide on the children's trust. Commissioners, I thank you very much for your time, the opportunity to present to you. Next up, you'll hear from a familiar face to you, a member of the Exploratory Committee, Mr. Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Michael. Jeff Smith, 325 28th Court Southwest, Vero Beach. First of all, I want to take a moment to thank this commission for even being willing to have this discussion. I want to thank the commission for what they've done in the past for children. I also want to thank Dylan and Jason. They've been top-notch through this whole process. I've talked to my colleague in Jacksonville, who is the clerk up there, and Dylan, where Dylan came from, and he speaks so highly of Dylan, and I can't speak any higher of Dylan and what he's done in his addition for this county. So I want to thank him specifically for bringing up issues that we hadn't thought of and coming up with solutions. This commission has done things. This and previous commissions have done things in the past that are fiscally responsible for ensuring the future success of this county. I can think of one right off the top of my head, which is the OPEB. Everywhere I go, I speak about that, where you guys are proactively funding the OPEB trust so that you're not kicking the can down the road. We're only one of 3 counties in the entire state that are doing that, and by your actions, what you're doing is releasing some of the burden on future taxpayers. And that's basically what we're trying to do is you all have invested in buildings and roads and utility projects and bridges to increase the economic ability of this county and for future generations. We're trying to invest in our children for the same reason, to reduce the cost later on of intervention. There's a lot of compelling reasons to invest in our children, but we're not talking about what feels good. The single most strategic investment that will produce a revenue return is investing in the future taxpayers. Your future taxpayers are your children. The data regarding the need is compelling. How are we doing in Indian River County? Well, I'm glad you asked. In the 1,200 births in Indian River County per year, 50% of those are already Medicaid eligible once they're born. That means that 600 kids are automatically in need of wraparound services before they're even out of the hospital. Our indicators show great challenges that we have that are above the state averages. 40% of our households are considered ALICE. For those of you that are not familiar with what ALICE stands for, the United Way uses ALICE as a key indicator of where to target services. ALICE stands for Asset Limited Income Constrained and Employed. Thank you. Almost 65% of our students are on free and reduced lunch. That's greater than the state average. We have a bigger need for foster care, as Commissioner Zork knows, and sexual violence rates in Indian River County, substance abuse and hospitalizations for mental disorders, and we're having a high number of youths arrested as juveniles. The snapshot that we're going to show you next was developed to provide meaningful insight into the needs of our children and a sense of some of the associated costs. Of the current CSAC-funded agencies, 20 of them have reported that they have about 3,800 kids on the wait list. When you add, you can do the math at $2,222 per estimated per child. That comes up to quite a large number. The data also shows that 7,200 children in our 0 to 5 age group in Indian River County, 4,600 of those live on the poverty line, and less than 2,000 are currently being served by the CSAC funding. But more importantly, to Administrator Brown's point about the constitutional amendment, which I agree with, we need to focus on the state funding because that's what the constitutional amendment says. But to address his concern, for the age group of 0 to 3, there are 4,800 children in our community, 3,100 of which live on the margin of poverty. The average cost of quality early education childhood in Indian River County is estimated to be about $11,000 per year. Quality extended daycare programs are 17,000 students in our public school system. 10,000 live on the margins of poverty. This snapshot provides a window into the great opportunity we have to invest in our children and the future of our community. As Mr. Kent just said a minute ago, the additional increase at a third of a mil, let's concentrate on that for a minute, is additional $40 per year per taxpayer on the average. That's less than $4 per month. We cannot begin to put a dollar value on the life of a child. I know. I lost a child some 35 years ago. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't wonder who she'd be today. Given the opportunity and the concerning statistics, I ask you to consider this. 1 out of every 6 Indian River County residents is a child. They are arguably your most important constituent and the only one that doesn't have a vote. Advancing this referendum with adequate funding sends a strong message that we value our kids and clearly affirms that we are a community willing to invest in our children. A child doesn't make the choice to be born to drug-addicted parents. The child doesn't make the choice to be born to parents who either won't do what they're supposed to do or don't know how. The child doesn't make the choice to be born to a single-parent situation. The child doesn't make the choice to be born and then taken away from their parents and put into the foster care system or placed with their grandparents to be raised. I know of a person who sits on my United Way board who was going down the wrong path. And because one person intervened in her life, she's now a master's degree licensed psychologist, and she's doing great things. And that person who intervened in her life was my wife. She spent 30 years in the school district in this county, the last 11 at alternative school. And she saw firsthand the need, the devastation of children who didn't have a proper beginning to life. What we're proposing is that the person who we believe that intervention earlier, before they get to school, will produce substantially more positive results. Less costly intervention later, less costly adjudication, incarceration, social and mental intervention. That's the investment, the return on the investment that we're seeking. And that's a huge return on investment. What we do now will determine what kind of a community we will have in the future. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak. And now I'd like to introduce to you another common, well-known person who's a member of our exploratory committee, but also a member of the current CSAC committee, Hope Woodhouse.
Wow, okay. Good morning. You never know how close to get to these things. Jeff's estimates are conservative. The way I look at them is in the context of the fact that we have underinvested in our children for the past 20 years by not having a higher millage. I'd like to compare us to Martin County right now, which I think all of us would say is probably our most similar neighbor. It has had a children's trust or a children's council since 1988. Their millage started at 0.12 and today is 0.36. For the past 20 years, on average, Martin has outspent us 6 to 7 to 1. It explains why, and I'm going to give you a couple numbers, and I don't have a slide, but I can give it to you later. It explains why Martin is doing so much better than Indian River County on so many measures. Not just related to children, but related to the future of the community. Their median household income in Martin is 11% higher. Their unemployment is 23% lower. Children under 18 in poverty are 20% lower than Indian River County. Households in poverty are 10% lower. Alice has been mentioned. Alice is 40% lower in Martin County. Population over 25 with no high school degree is 19% lower in Martin County. Now moving to sort of the children's results, Martin County's third grade FSA is 5% higher than ours, which really, we got to give kudos to TLA in here for helping us close the gap, because that number has improved over the last 5 years. However, math, which is measured in 8th grade, the scores in Martin County are 23% higher. So that's another focus area. And my last statistic, before I bore you, is birth to young women under the age of 19. Martin County is half the number of births. Martin's 43. We have 75 births in Indian River County for children under the age of 19. And finally, Martin's assessed land values are 20% higher than ours, and that means greater revenues. There appears to be a direct correlation between investing in our children and the actual long-term outcomes in a community. The only area of investment that provides a revenue return to a county is investing in our future taxpayers. Indian River County has a lot of catching up to do when you look at what Martin's done. So when you look at the numbers of the millage and scaling in, I mean, we really need everything now. So moving to what Jeff said, I have spent the last 9 years on the CSAC grant committee as well as being on the main CSAC committee. My comments related to the committee are really related to the grant committee. So we've come a long way. We've come from 600,000 in funds to 2 million, and thank you. We started that battle or brigade or whatever, crusade, sorry, looking for the right word, 5 years ago. And you know, I am speaking now, I'm grateful we were able to get there, and thank you. We've also improved a number of things. As Michael mentioned, we're on the United Way grant system, so everything's online and easy to use. We carefully review data. The committee, I mean, we've been part of all the different needs assessments. We're actually correcting the data of the consultants that are providing it. Over time, the committee has added really qualified new members who add a lot of expertise. And finally, the limited support 0.5 FTE that we get is a superstar. And I don't know if Leanne Uribe is in here, but she is such an improvement and has been providing data to us and reporting that we have never had before, in which a quality committee really needs. So thank you, Leanne. This is great, but it's only a start. We have to move, and I want to address something in staff's report. We have to move from a reactive committee with a bare bones process to one that is strategic and focused on making real long-term changes in Indian River County. Long-term changes, you want a middle class who's paying taxes and building nice houses and making this town or county vibrant. That requires an adequately funded children's trust with a support staff. Today, the CSAC process, and again, that's the grant committee, is completely reactive. Agencies are literally limited to submitting an application and a 20-minute presentation. And at that time, all they want to do is, make sure they keep what they had the year before. There's zero time to really talk to the agency and discuss where they could be doing a better job and where they would scale if they had adequate funds. We have some amazing programs in this county and that we should be having more conversations with. The county would benefit. But to really be great and to really make a difference, we need experienced executive director who can work directly with the agencies and be a liaison to them. And the reason for this is, you all know far better than I do, the sunshine. A committee, you or a grant committee or CSAC, cannot talk to the agencies. But staff, like over the last couple weeks, can talk to the people. So we need that executive director to work with the agencies and really know what's going on. I'm part of a foundation in New York that tries to break the cycle of poverty. The organization structure is you have a committee, you have an executive director, the committee determines the mission and the vision. The executive director's job is to bring the best programs that meet that mission, and then the board votes. So the executive director is, the board retains control, and some of the issues that Jason talked about before really are not relevant. So the other thing that staff's letter stated, that 80% of the programs that were requested last year were funded. That's not because there's not a need. It's because of the process that I just described. Additionally, as has been mentioned, the proposed advisory board needs to continue expanding and adding members with deep expertise in the different areas. Finally, and this is sort of my mantra, the most important thing we have to focus on is quality. There's tons of research out there on early childhood education, extended day, extended year. But every single one of them have a very strong caveat. To have impact, the programs must be of high quality and have sufficient dosage. This isn't a one-day-a-week thing. You need something that happens multiple times, has enough time on task in order to make meaningful change. We also have to demand proof from our agencies that their programs are moving the needle, and this is metrics. We have to become much more metric-driven. So, in conclusion, Indian River County needs an adequately funded children's trust with professional staff. We need engaged advisory board with deep expertise, willing to devote an extended amount of time to making Indian River County's children literate, productive leaders of our community in the future. We need this now. We owe this to the county's future, because if we don't invest in our children, our future in Indian River County is bleak. The children we produce now, and hopefully this will become our mantra, will determine what kind of a community we will be in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good morning. Karen Toole, 233 37th Drive Southwest, Vero Beach. I'm a current member of the Children's Services Advisory Council, the Needs Subcommittee, and the Grant Subcommittee. I'm also the Indian River County Director for Communities Connected for Kids, the office serving child welfare services here in Indian River County. I've been blessed to be on the CSAC committee for 5 years. I've learned so much about my community and about what providers are here every day, and we are so grateful for the increase in funding that we've received during the last few years. We've watched our providers innovate and seek out well-respected programming that they've brought here to our community that have really started to move the needle but I know that they could innovate more and they could come up with lots of programs, and I'm sure these ladies are here and they're going to talk about that. But I wanted to talk about a little bit about child welfare here in Indian River County. Currently, we serve all of the cases from the Department of Children and Families. So if DCF goes out to investigate, we receive the case sometimes the next day, and we may have it for 6 years, depending on the situation. We currently serve anywhere from 200 to 250 children every day. Those children are in and out of our office on a regular basis, some 3 times a week, visiting their parents. We have these providers in our office. On any given day, we might have Healthy Start, Tykes and Teens, or Legacy Behavioral Health there working with our children. I'm blessed to see those providers and the differences that they make in our children. The child welfare cases in the last 18 years that I've been working, the kids are coming in more complex. They have more behavioral issues. They've been faced with more adverse childhood experiences, which, as you know, makes for a very difficult upbringing and a more difficult adulthood. The only way to address these behavioral deficits and these adverse experiences is through service provision. And our providers have the ability to have well-trained staff. They have well-respected, evidence-based programming. They have staff that know how to engage our clients, which is very, very important. And these are characteristics that all of our community providers have, and it's so important. It's important to keep wait lists down because when children come into care, they have needs that are immediate, and we need to address them immediately. If a provider has a 2-month waiting list, that's 2 months this child is not receiving a service that could be critical to their school success, the success in their placement, be it with a relative or a foster home. These are all things that are very important. As a mother, I can say just last month, my 15-year-old in the month of January at the Freshman Learning Center participated in 2 of our programs. She participated in the Baby Think It Over program, which is a teen pregnancy prevention program through Children's Home Society. Every day she came home and we talked about it. Every day she came home and couldn't believe how expensive it is to have a baby. And these were things that we would never have discussed really, but in a passing situation. And she wouldn't have listened to it the way that from me as the way that it was presented to her. And the other program that she experienced last month was Erica's Lighthouse, which is a suicide prevention program. And while suicide might not be something that she would ever think about, and that's what she said on the first day, Mom, we had this suicide prevention program, and I said, but honey, you may have a friend who's on that spectrum one day, or a coworker, or a roommate in college, and the skills that you learned in these programs might come to you at that time, and it may benefit someone, may not necessarily be you. And so these programs are being brought to children that they can come home and talk about with their families. They talk about it with their friends. My daughter said every day at lunch they sat there and talked about Baby Think It Over, and wow, this is not something I'm ready to do at any time. So, I think there's so much that can be brought to these children, and it's so important. Parenting today is a whole other ballgame with the opioid crisis, vaping, social media, you name it. Parents need help. We need help. We don't know where to turn. We don't know what to do, and it's petrifying, to be honest. And I'm grateful that my community funds providers that are experts in these things and buy into programs that are well-respected and evidence-based that can move the needle on advocacy for these things. And I think, just as an example, the stigma of mental health and just where that's come in the last 10 years is just beautiful to see. 10 years ago, if you had a mental health issue in your family, that wasn't something anybody talked about. But these days, those issues are on the forefront. People are proud to say they're receiving services and proud to say that working with providers. And that only makes for a healthier community. These funds touch all Indian River County children in some way, on every socioeconomic level, because substance abuse, domestic violence, and mental health don't discriminate. Trauma, special needs, and educational deficits don't discriminate. Having a sustained, coordinated system of care for children's providers only ensures provider stability and innovation. These funds build children up and give them tools to be successful, resilient, and prosperous citizens, which is the ultimate return on our investment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to tell you about why I support the formation and significant funding of the Children's Trust. I'm Bob Schlitt Jr., a lifelong resident of Indian River County. I sit on the current Children's Services Advisory Committee, and I am the chairperson of the Grant Review Subcommittee. My support starts with one of my core beliefs, that it's my place in this world to help the ones that come behind me. It is my place, especially as someone who has been given so many opportunities, to make sure that opportunities exist for all those coming and those yet to come. I'm a fourth generation member of this community. My great-grandparents, Louis and Anna Schlitt, came here like many others for the warmer climate, believe it or not, in 1918. My great-grandmother's doctor in St. Louis, Missouri, told her that her respiratory system would be better acclimated to the weather here in Florida. So they moved with their 5 children to Vero Beach. My grandmother, then known as Florence Miller, came here after visiting her cousin and met the man of her dreams, John Schlitt. They raised 8 children. By the time Florence died in 1990, she had over 100 direct descendants. That's children and grandchildren. I could always tell how old my grandmother was. She was born in 1900, so she died in 1990. That's simple math. Even I can do that. Many of them continue to live here today, and there's many more than 100. As a member of one of the pioneer families of this community, I believe this community gave our family and me many opportunities to grow and prosper. For that reason, I believe in the concept of the Children's Trust. My parents raised 8 children, and when they saw children in the community struggling from abuse and abandonment, they thought we could do something, and they could help out some area teenagers by becoming foster parents. First, they did this on a voluntary basis, not affiliated, and then later affiliated with the state and the Florida system of child welfare. Through a period of more than 30 years, my parents fostered over 400 children in this community. During this period of my life, I met and lived with children who suffered some of the most violent and degrading situations that any child has to go through. I learned that while I had great opportunities in this community, there are many children who don't have those opportunities. And it is through caring, compassionate members of our community that opportunities can be given to these children. For that reason, I believe in the ability of the Children's Trust to bring those opportunities to all of our children. I'm blessed today to run a successful insurance and investment company with my cousin and business partner, Jeff Schlitt. We employ 23 great employees. All of them are productive, tax-paying members of our community. In order for my business to continue to grow, we must have people who have good education and values. In order for that to happen, we need to make sure we, as a community, invest money that helps our babies leave the womb healthy so that they spend their early years learning and thriving rather than fighting for survival. For that reason, I believe in the power of the Children's Trust. In an effort to build the world's best educational system, we must invest in our youngest children to make sure they're ready to enter kindergarten in the best possible shape to reach early educational milestones. There's a wide body of research that demonstrates that early childhood interventions do work. For these reasons, I believe in the future of the Children's Trust. In a world where elementary and middle school-age children are given every opportunity to sit in front of an electronic screen and live a sedentary life that leads to high levels of obesity, we need to make sure there are a multitude of opportunities that get them outside, learning, interacting with nature and the environment, getting involved in athletics, spending time with others their age, engaging in positive activities. We know that dollars invested in giving children alternative outlets reduces juvenile justice expenses and improves health outcomes. For that reason, I believe in the excitement of the Children's Trust. There have always been, and there will continue to be, many negative influences for our children. We as a community must invest in our older children to provide them positive influences, such as mentors, and positive places to go that give them assistance in schoolwork, as well as fun places to hang out with others striving for a better life. Places that are there for them after school and during the summer months. For that reason, I believe in the potential of the Children's Trust. For those children that do end up following in the negative influences that are all around them, we need to have programs in place that act as safety nets to show them that we as a community care about them and provide them opportunities to get their lives back on track. For that reason, I believe in the hope of the Children's Trust. We are blessed in this county to have so many great nonprofits working together to bring children all these opportunities to them. I believe so much in this nonprofit work that I, along with my partner, cousin, my identical cousin, Jeff Schlitt, are this year's chairpersons of the United Way fundraising campaign. But the private nonprofit world cannot do it all themselves. We need financial assistance from everyone in this county. For that reason, I believe in the universality of the Children's Trust. When I first became aware of this potential initiative, my first thought was, we don't need to spend resources on bureaucracy and kingdom building. I've seen other counties who ran government-funded children's programs as just another government agency that spends as much money on themselves as they spend on funding children's programs. I believe the Indian River County Children's Trust is set up to put the money where the rubber meets the road, working with people and organizations that work directly with all the children in the county. In addition, oversight is provided for by our county's highest ranking and smartest elected officials, the County Commission. For that reason, I believe in the fiscal soundness of the Children's Trust. As we've moved further into this journey, our ad hoc committee has had conversations with many different people and organizations in the community. And at one recent meeting, I heard someone say something that hit me like a ton of bricks. He said something to the effect of, imagine that you're headed into Indian River County off of I-95, and at the exit, there's a large billboard that says, "Welcome to Indian River County, a community that puts the needs of its children at the heart of everything." That blew me away. That picture, we can build that community. We can build that community. In my mind's eye, I can see this vision. With a school board headed towards an A-rated system, with world-class education, with a health district committed to providing excellent physical and mental health opportunities, with the best nonprofits in the country, and now a Children's Trust committed to providing long-term sustainable funding, we can be that community. What a great example to the rest of Florida, to the country, and to the world. For that reason, I believe in the hope of the Children's Trust. For these reasons and for so many more, I hope that you too can support and believe in the Children's Trust of Indian River County. Thank you.
Good morning. Robert Paw, 4010 12th Place Southwest here in Vero. When I first got asked to join this committee, Lisa had approached me, and I serve on other venues here in town. I'm the president of the Vero Beach Air Show, immediate past chair of the Chamber of Commerce, also a local businessman, owner of a construction company. I wasn't sure where my input was going to be requested or what background it was. I thought maybe in the construction, maybe they wanted an unfiltered opinion as to how things happen. So that being said, in my opinion, we need to develop a plan. We need a schedule. I think that the basis of planning is looking to the future and doing something about it today. These are things that I'm fearful we're behind on right now. And I think our scheduling needs to really come to fruition. A couple of statistics, 92% of major employers report that incoming workforce do not have the executive functioning skills or the employability skills necessary to function in the workplace. Those skills are what you learn in your earliest years, exposed to quality programs, communications, critical thinking, problem solving, working collaboratively, and empathy are things to speak of. Illiteracy impacts the economy. In terms of lost productivity, it is estimated that the portion of the population that cannot read costs our nation $225 billion a year. That's a staggering amount of money. We know that somewhere between 40 to 60% of students in elementary school are already struggling. How will they be prepared for the changes in education and career readiness that are about to happen in our future? The jobs of tomorrow don't exist today. In 2030, there will be 26 million Floridians, and there will be 1.7 million new jobs because of the changes in automation, robotics, artificial intelligence, globalization, and shared economies. Advancing technologies require paths for critical thinking. And there's things we need to remember, that the earners of tomorrow will need to be the learners of today. We look forward to the future and ensure that we are being globally, regionally, and locally competitive, prosperous, vibrant, and sustainable. The earlier the investment, the greater the payoff. The later the investment, the lower the rate of return. I just believe that it's imperative that we have a plan in place and we look forward to our future and we do something about it today. That's why I support this organization and what they're here for. Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners, Mr. Brown, Mr. Reingold. Good morning, Darrell Lohr, Sheriff, Indian River County. I want to thank the previous speakers and the future speakers, and as importantly, everyone that's in this audience. As many of you know, I have been on the CSAC board for 12 years. And for our friends that aren't quite familiar with that, you should understand that we have a working group that meets on Monday evenings every other month. Commissioner O'Brien and myself have been there, I believe, for the last 12 years. So when the agencies come to us with a proposal after they fill out their grants, we certainly vet them and screen them. And another component does site visits on their particular organizations. And I can tell you, friends, that if they are not meeting or reaching our goals and objectives, they're not funded. It's pretty simple. We've made some very strong decisions in the past about eliminating funding for particular agencies. And that is tough. I'll also tell you, in 9 and 10 and 11 and 12, when our dollars, our county dollars, began to condense, we had some tougher decisions to make. In fact, we were, I believe at one point, around $600,000. And some agencies disappeared. Some agencies tightened their belts. Some agencies that couldn't tighten their belts disappeared again, as mentioned. But I will tell you, from a law enforcement perspective, I can give you all types of statistics about who excels and who doesn't. In fact, about 75% of our incarcerated inmates are illiterate. It's unfortunate that once they're out of the jail, we do the research and we can tell that majority of this happened in their early childhood, no doubt about it. Furthermore, we can tell you that once they are somehow educated through the GED program in our jail, they're successful, and the recidivism is significant on their return to jail. I think also as important as the previous speakers, we should also think about some of the agencies that we fund for after-school care. I can tell you particularly that there's agencies in rural parts of the community that, in fact, absent our funding, those boys and girls, young teenagers would be out on the streets committing crimes and making our community unsafe. So with that, I appreciate Mr. Smith bringing up OPEB. I know Mr. Brown and I, and for the audience generally speaking, Mr. Brown and I get along for the most part. But it boils down to what we're all talking about here today, friends, and that's the money. It's all about the money. We have to build the roots, as Ms. Woodhouse said, with respect to making our community as powerful as possible. This is just a small investment, relatively speaking. We're talking $50 per household on average. I think we can do that, and in 20 years we look back, this body will be responsible for the success of our community. Thank you and good morning.
Thank you, Commissioners, for the opportunity to speak with you here this morning. My name is Ray Oglethorpe. Thank you. My name is Ray Oglethorpe. I live at 629 Lake Drive, Vero Beach, Florida, and I'm the chairman of the board of the Learning Alliance. You know, it's amazing in education, what do we tend to focus on? We tend to focus on such things like high school graduation rates, college graduation rates, remedial education, adult education. That's where the money is, and that's where a lot of the focus is, unfortunately. However, those things that I just mentioned are really outcomes at the end of the process versus focusing on the things that start the process. These are outcomes that we have relatively little chance of affecting at the end of the line. We forget about the necessity of building a strong foundation through early childhood education that starts at birth, and it's just not at 4 years old at pre-K. It starts at birth, and it gives children the skills to be lifelong learners. This is a science-based conclusion. It's not my conclusion. We know at the brain, 50% of the brain's development occurs between 0 and 3 years old. Now, we got to change this model from starting to building the roof in the second story before we build the foundation education. We've got to focus on building the foundation. Through the Learning Alliance's efforts, and 125 partners, many of us are sitting in this room, 125 Moonshot Community Action Network partners who are nonprofits, agencies, and others trying to address these issues outside the school's walls from birth to 8 years old. This school district has achieved some amazing results in reaching our goal of having 90% of our children reading on grade level by the end of the 3rd grade. Over the last 4 years, the school district of Indian River County has climbed from having 53% of its 3rd graders reading on grade level to 60% last year, the highest ever in the school district. The district is ranked in the top 15 out of 68 districts for 3rd grade literacy gains, and is above the Florida reading average for this whole state. In spite of, you heard of 66%, in spite of, in the 3rd grade, we have a 70% rate of 3rd graders on free and reduced lunch versus a state's average of 60%. You know, as good as this progress is, it could have been a lot better if the number of children entering kindergarten unprepared, currently at 48%, had been dramatically reduced. Some of them are coming in as much as 1 to 2 years behind their more well-off peers. Imagine if you were a kindergarten teacher faced with not only trying to teach the standard curriculum, but also trying to catch up these kids that are coming so far behind, 48% of them. That's really an unbelievable challenge and rarely successful if just done alone by that teacher. By the end of the 3rd grade, those kids coming in behind will be another 1.5 years behind due to the summer slide, and they'll only have a 1 in 6 chance of ever catching up. But it can be done, or at least we can improve the odds of some success by providing extended learning opportunities outside the school for these struggling students through summer and after-school programs, in addition to getting children more prepared through kindergarten through quality, and that's the key word, through quality childhood education. It's just not the $2,500 that the state of Florida gives for kids 4 and above. To me, when we know what can be done to improve this situation, it's a great failure of our society, that we allow 40% of our children to fail so early in their life. The simple objective of getting 90% of 3rd graders reading on grade level is a large and complex problem. If it wasn't, we would have solved it by now as a nation. We're making major gains here in Indian River County to be a model for the nation, but we still have a long way away from our goal, and it will take a public and private partnership to make it happen. We can't just scale it alone. It takes a big amount of resources to do that, and only a public and private partnership can do it, because the resources required are so big as has been announced or talked about before. I remember 5 years ago standing here asking you to increase, going from $600,000 for children's services and increasing up to $2 million. Thank you very much. That was tremendous, and I think we've delivered the results. We're now up to the 0.125. Back then, I promised, and the people that spoke at that meeting promised that we would be good stewards of that money and deliver the results, and I know we have delivered. In closing, I'd like you to think of one thing. I don't know if you know this, but as CSAC funding increased, so did the school district's results. You may not have been aware of that or even noticed it. Was it just pure luck that this all of a sudden happened in the last 4 years? Or an actual cause and effect? I'll tell you, if I was a politician sitting up there, I'd be celebrating that success and claiming credit for it. Trust this community again. We're dedicated. We're going to do more than what's recommended. We want to make this community succeed. There is the leadership, the managerial talent, and a collaborative spirit to use these dollars wisely and deliver data-driven results. Cardinal Roger Mahoney said, and I think it sums it up well, any society, any nation is judged on the basis of how it treats its weakest members, the last, the least, the littlest. You've read and heard and seen what the speakers before have said, the demonstrated need. Now all I'm asking, and I think all of us are asking, is let the voters decide in November to treat our littlest members right. Thank you very much.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm glad to be here. My name is Wanda Lincoln. I live at 511 Shores Drive. I'm a member of this exploratory committee, which has been a journey. I also am on the CSAC grant committee and am involved in several other nonprofits. I look at you, commissioners, and I look at so many of my friends and colleagues that are in the audience, and what I understand is that we are the voice of the children. You can't have a program where a 3-year-old gets up. Well, you could, but I'm not sure that that would be as productive as listening to the heartfelt thoughts of those of us who are involved. Because of your commitment and because of the commitments of the nonprofit world out in our county, we have created a pretty powerful baseline of community care and support for our county's children. Yet with all that effort and with all that good intent, we find ourselves today, 2020 in Indian River County, with an unconscionable number of children who do not receive quality care from the time they're born until they're 3. There are large numbers of children who are on, as I think someone said, who are on waiting lists to develop their literacy and skills and math. We do not have parental support for appropriate development of children at all levels because these children do not grow up by themselves, hopefully. We need to support families. We have children who have deep behavioral issues, and what happens is when they're in school, they end up in the principal's office, that ends up in detention, that ends up in suspension, that ends up somewhere in the juvenile justice system. What we know what our children's needs are, and we ignore that at our peril. Yes, we have begun. And we should feel good about how we have begun, but we've only just begun. I just realized, wasn't that a song? Didn't think of that when I was writing it. We need to have successful programs, and we do have successful programs, but what we need to do is to scale those so we don't miss out on the children. We don't have waiting lists, and we do have children who are taken care of from birth. What you have up on the slide is called Smart Investment. And this diagram comes from the work of a Nobel laureate. His name is James Hetland. He's at the University of Chicago. And what he has followed is there are several long-term, it's easy, I think, sometimes to look short-term and see what we're doing. But he has looked at For example, the Perry School Program in Ypsilanti, Michigan, and that's been going on for over 30 years. And this is what he has found. He found that the biggest payoff comes with prenatal programs, programs targeted towards the earliest years, and then preschool programs. If by some miracle the state of Florida would adequately fund pre-K, as was mentioned before, it still gives us the most powerful challenge, because where's the biggest payoff? Early, really early. And those children have the least voice. The other thing that Dr. Heckman has done is he's created what he calls the Heckman equation. And what this equation says is, if you want to have long-term upstream solutions to problems that exist or could potentially exist in our county, you follow these steps. And the first step is we have to invest. How many of you knew that? Not telling anybody anything new, but we invest in early education for disadvantaged children. Then the goal of that investment, and this is again why we need oversight and we need the Children's Trust to make sure that the programs that are being created are defined by equal access for all kids. It isn't that some, because you were born to an addicted mom, you don't get equal access to quality care, to quality upbringing. So we have to invest. And then the next step in the Heckman equation is develop that. By developing, what he means is you can't just say, okay, I took care of this little 6-month-old baby, I did a great job, because have you noticed they grow up? And as they grow, what we are responsible for helping them as our valued possession, not a possession, but our valued children, to develop their cognitive skills. Cognitive skills, that's a nice buzzword. What that means is you help them to think, you help them to problem solve, you help them to know the timetables, you help them to read, and you continue to having programs that develop children's intellect, but you also help them to develop what are called, euphemistically, social skills. That means attentiveness, working with others, persistence. I love the word grit. How many, we want our kids to have grit. We want them to work through issues. We want them to have high character. We want them to have self-discipline, and need I say, I would throw in the word manners. These are social skills. So we develop that according to Heckman, and we don't lose sight. Then we have to sustain that. We have to say, I'm not going to give up. If you are a parent, one of the things that you know is that when the kids are growing up, they have high points, and you think, oh man, these kids are really doing, and then what happens? They fall off a cliff, and then we pick them up, and then we keep going again. And that happens to nonprofits. It happens in the real world. It happens that we have to say, I will sustain this. I will keep at it, and I will constantly, and that's why the Children's Trust is going to be, has the potential to be so powerful, is that we can take a look at what are the best programs, what are the ones that made the most difference. We'll resist fads and the latest thing that comes down the pike, and we'll take a look at what really works, and we'll sustain that. And if we invest and we develop and we sustain, we have the real potential for the kind of gain that our community and our children deserve. To be healthy, to be growing, to be well supported, and those kinds of programs and that attention will create what was mentioned certainly before of capable, productive, and valuable workers that pays dividends for this, for our generation and for generations to come. We believe that to do the right thing for children now and in the future, our county deserves strong leadership. That's you. It deserves investment of time and dollars in a fashion that we are accountable for. It demands strong philanthropic organizations that are out there cheerleading, and I'm so happy. And it also requires an alignment so that we don't have overlap, so that we're not in a position of saying, oh, they do it, and with alignment of services and maximize results. We believe in establishing and robustly funding the Indian River Children's Trust can do all that and more. To you, commissioners, being the voice of the county's children and the voice of the county residents is not easy. Have you noticed? You have many tugs. You have many people coming before you. It's not easy, and we realize that. However, we also know that you were elected to do what's right for the county now, and what's right for the county in the future. We think that future should hold a children's trust. Thank you.
Thank you. If it pleases my fellow commissioners, I'm going to go ahead and call a 10-minute break.
I was going to go regardless of the break.
Well, she